So in my video last time I talked about learning scales going up and down the neck. I talked about visualization principles, memory principles, and the way you can apply those to learn scales really quickly. And at the end of that video I touched upon movement as well and how movement affects memory. But actually this whole area is really quite useful and really quite powerful in terms of learning how to play the guitar. And there's some principles here that you can take advantage of that will accelerate your development when it comes to learning how your fingers move and actually applying them to the scales and the arpeggios that you want to play. And that's what I want to talk about this week. Now, when you dig into these scales and arpeggios, you'll find there's sort of 7 classes of movement that you can use to sort of define how you play pretty much any scale or arpeggio. Sort of maybe 95% of everything that you play on the neck can be fitted into one of these 7 categories. And that's the thing that I want to focus on. Now, the principle behind this is really quite straightforward. It's really quite obvious when you think about it. And let me give you an example. If I wanted to learn to play another instrument, an instrument I've never played before, then the chances are, if that instrument was the ukulele or the banjo, then I'd pick it up that much more quickly than if it was the trombone. Obviously, because, you know, those instruments have strings, they've got frets, and you pluck them as well. But the same's true when you're learning the guitar as well. If you're learning a new skill, if you're learning a new scale or a new position, if you can take advantage of movements, of finger movements that you already know, and you can apply them to this new scale or position, then your learning will accelerate that much more quickly than it would if you're learning this stuff from scratch. And that's what we're taking advantage of in the lesson this week. So the power of these shapes is not necessarily in the shapes themselves, but in how you can apply these shapes to play scales and how you can apply this same shape to play a whole range of different scales as well. So the same motor skills can be used to play a whole class of scales, if you see what I mean, rather than a single one. Now, the criteria that I found seemed to make the most difference was how the notes were mapped out on each string, or how many notes were mapped out on each string. And as I say, I grouped these into a series of 7 different groupings, neck layouts, sort of the DNA of each of these classes, if you like. And that's really what I want to dig in this week. Now, a few of these you're going to know. First 3 are going to be pretty obvious. They fit very much into the, you know, the existing knowledge of playing the guitar. But it's really useful to understand why these are so powerful, and then you can take that learning elsewhere as well, as I'll try and demonstrate. So the first shape, perhaps not too surprisingly for you, is 3 notes per string. So mapping whatever you want to play as 3 notes on a string. And the power of this is not necessarily the fact that you're playing 3 notes per string. The power is the fact that every position of the major scale can be mapped out as 3 notes per string. Every position of the minor scale, every position of the melodic minor, every position of the harmonic minor, the diminished scale, Bebop scales can be mapped out at 3 notes per string as well. And each one of these, when you can play these, when you develop the motor skills to be able to play 3 notes per string, you'll find that these motor skills will transition pretty well between each one of these approaches as well. And there's a nice little experiment that you can do just to try and prove this to yourself. And what you could do is just invent a scale. So if I do something like that, where I've got a semitone and a tone, and I play that on any string, so it's a new scale, I'll find that I can do descending 4s like this. And it's not something I've ever done before, but you can see I've already got the motor skills to play descending 4s, because I can play, you know, major scale 3 notes per string like that. And the motor skills required to play 1 are pretty much the motor skills required required to play the other as well, and you find those same motor skills will map across all of the other 3 notes per string scale shapes. So that's the real power of this. The other thing you can do once you realise this is you can think outside the box. You don't just have to play major scales like this, but anything you lay out as on 3 notes per string can take advantage of the same motor skills as well. So for example, I could reach out with a pentatonic. So instead of playing 2 notes, I play 3 on every string, and I've got that repeated note. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Same motor skill. Yeah. Or arpeggios. And again, you can really kind of distort this quite a long way and still be able to take advantage of the same motor skills. So what I've got there, I'm playing a minor 7th arpeggio, but what I've done, put 3 notes on the G string, 3 notes on the E string. Yeah. And it's close enough to a similar, set of motor skills, similar layout, that I can use the same motor skills and kind of get away with it. Yeah, just by the fact that I've put 3 notes per string. So that's the first class. It's useful to be aware of. So the next pattern, not too surprisingly, I guess, is 2 notes per string. And all of the pentatonics fit into this class as well. In each position you can play as 2 notes per string, but pretty much anything that has about 5 notes in an octave can be laid out as 2 notes per string, as long as they're reasonably spread out across the octave. So 9th arpeggios, can be laid out as 2 notes per string as well. The other class, which is really useful, is where you take a chord and you give every note a leading note, which, for me, brings back images of Django Reinhardt, that kind of approach as well. But all of these, again, use similar motor skills to be able to play them. So this is a really useful class of movement to be able to get used to as well. Okay, the third class, and no prizes for guessing this, is 1 note per string, so arpeggios or chords or whatever. And you find when you have 1 note per string, you can do things like sweep picking or rakes or stuff like that, and that's the whole power of this. So anything that can be laid out on the neck as 1 note per string, be it a scale or the edge of a scale is what I like to follow, the contour of the edge of a scale or the edge of a pentatonic or a chord, you can use sweep picking to be able to play, and that's the power of 1 notes per string. Okay, so the next set I find a little bit more interesting because these mix the numbers of notes per string. So the first one I want to talk about is alternating 2 and 1. So there's a minor 7th, and 7th arpeggios seem to fit quite nicely, whether they're minor, major, so major, dominant, minor, minor 7th flat 5. They all fit on this kind of alternating 1 note, 2 note kind of pattern, and you can find you can sort of move them up the neck as well. Yeah. So this is a useful neck layout as well. It's something I find I use quite a lot. And when I look at a lot of advanced guitarists, have a look at them playing their 7th arpeggios. You'll find that this pattern just keeps cropping up and cropping up. It's well worth getting under your fingers as well. Okay, so the next one of these hybrid shapes is where you alternate 3 notes and 1. And this again, this works where you've got pentatonics or shapes that fit about 5 notes in an octave. So there's me playing a pentatonic. And again, this is kind of an advanced shape, but it's really useful and it really lends itself to sweep picking as well, because you find that when you're descending, you can do sort of up, down, up, down, up, down. Yeah. So pentatonics work like this. Ninth arpeggios, which have 5 notes in an octave, can be laid out like this. So that's a minor ninth, or there's a major ninth as well. So major, minor, dominant. They can all be laid out as this alternating 3 notes on 1 note. It's a really powerful type class of movement. It's worth getting under your fingers, because you'll find you'll be able to fly over this shape once you get it under your fingers. Okay, so the next class of shape is really great for playing major or minor arpeggios, and that's this. You put 2 notes, 1, 1, 1, and then 2, and it gives you a 2-octave arpeggio shape. And it gives you consistency across all of the major and the minor arpeggios. So there's a major arpeggio, I could do the same with the minor arpeggio. So 2, 1, 1, 1, and 2 there as well. And you can play other inversions as well with the same pattern. So again, you've got 2 notes, 1, 1, 1, and then 2 on the top, and the same shape as a minor arpeggio. Yeah, so it works as both major and minor. Really useful one if you want to have some consistency across the arpeggios you play. Okay, so the final pattern is worth experimenting with is to put 4 notes on a string. And you do this if you want to play Chromatics. Yeah, you play those with 4 notes on a string. But it's also great if you want to sort of play around with these extended ideas, like I did with the pentatonic right at the start. You can do the same thing with 3 notes per string instead of playing 3 notes on a string. You can play 4 notes and have that extra repeated note in there. And by doing that, you can create some really kind of interesting and intricate lines by doing this. And someone like Alan Holdsworth, for example, was a master of this particular approach of playing the guitar. So it's worth checking him out. And this is definitely an area I want to play around with as well. I keep meaning to classify all of my scales and arpeggios, turn all this into a book and release that, maybe one day. But anyway, if you explore this, you'll find that there's huge power in this approach in terms of understanding your existing scales and taking motor skills and applying them to that, or in learning new scales as well. One potential issue you may face is some scales feel a little bit kind of shoehorned into one of more of these patterns, so the fingering feels much more awkward. And that's a trade-off you need to think about. That's a personal decision you need to make. Do you want to take advantage of your existing motor skills and deal with the stretch that's inherent in that scale shape, or do you want to learn a new set? But at least you can make an informed decision about those kinds of situations. But anyway, that's it for this week. Hopefully that was useful for you, and we'll chat next time. Goodbye.